Okay. Again, let's start. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9, 2023, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, until 10 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. As we get ourselves sort of set up here, the hazard when you use sort of boards. I actually want to walk through a couple things. And if I don't make some folks mad, particularly on the other side tonight, I'm not doing my job. And let's see, Mr. Parliamentarian, we have till 10 o'clock as our shutdown time, correct? All right.
The gentleman is correct.
So we will go through this. How many of you have been basically hearing even the president today talking about the debt ceiling and how outrageous it is that Republicans are trying to actually use it for some policy? If there's any of the scribes that we call reporters, please listen for one moment. When we talk about the debt ceiling, how many of you remember 2017? How Democrats rolled Trump on the deficit ceiling. The Democrats and the press were giddy that when we were up against the debt ceiling in 2017, that Schumer and the gang basically required another $15 billion in spending. And that was the cost of their participation in a debt ceiling. Oh, but that would be outrageous to try to do policy as part of the debt ceiling. But you did it. And then, how about this? 2019. Does anyone remember someone called Speaker Pelosi? In that case, the extortion was additional spending of $324 billion. Now, the difference for Republicans is we're trying to save the country from the debt crisis, where the left was trying to spend more money. But this is in the last couple years. And now you basically have the press, a whole bunch of the Washington, D.C. chattering class. Obviously, our Democrat colleagues, we can't believe the Republicans are actually asking for some fiscal constraints. Okay, but it was just 2019 that Pelosi, no debt increase until spending limits are raised. That's policy. So how come it was wonderful just a few years ago, when we were up against the debt ceiling, when Democrats asked for policy changes, and now they're enraged that we're asking for it? Does anyone understand how absolutely duplicitous this place is and the short memories around here? It took us a good, 20, 30 seconds on a search engine to find this. If you're going to hold us to a standard, hold us to the very ones you on the left live by. 2017, you demanded changes. 2019, you demanded $324 billion of additional spending. And that was your price of playing with the debt ceiling. What we as conservatives and Republicans are basically asking is help us save the country. And you've got to understand some of the things going on. But this is a real point. And I know this makes some folks uncomfortable. The only way this place seems to work is when we're up against what's called a stressor. It's a budget. It's a deadline. It's a debt ceiling. But yet, if you look at the last couple decades, actually going back to the 80s, almost any time we've actually accomplished any fiscal constraints, we were up against a debt ceiling. Look, you go back to Gramm-Rudman, all the way through policy agreement after policy agreement. There's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 in functioning the last 40 years. Every single one of these came from a debt ceiling. And yet, if you read particularly the Washington, D.C. press, and these are supposed to be people that know what the hell's going on, we can't believe Speaker McCarthy and those Republicans are actually asking for some fiscal constraint tied to the debt ceiling. Now, when the left had it, they demanded more spending. But all these are ones that actually gave us some policy. It's just the duplicity around here. And does anyone pay attention to the numbers coming out of Treasury, the numbers coming out of CBO, the numbers coming out of joint tax? Are you following what's actually going on? Sorry, I'm trying not to get too angry. If I have any of my members here or your staff, I know literacy sometimes isn't our greatest accomplishment around here. This is this week's Economist magazine. Please, someone just read the cover. Fiscal Fantasyland. When will politicians wake up? When the Economist magazine is warning us how much danger we're in and that the numbers are coming off the rails. You need to understand what the hell's going on. Governments are living in a fiscal fantasy land. And this is from the Economist magazine talking about the green tax credits that we were all promised. Remember, the left got up in front of these microphones and said, there'll not be more than $391 billion over the 10 years. And then all of a sudden we come back and find out the actual scoring's turning into $1.2 trillion. And yes, CBO rescored it and they basically doubled it. But the outside world is calculating it. Goldman and others are basically saying, no, it's 1.2 trillion. Do you remember how proud the left was? Is we're going to cut the deficit because we raised these taxes and then we're going to do these green credits. Have you noticed they don't talk about that anymore? Because the new scoring, it spends money. It doesn't save a dime. Yet at the same time, do you understand what's happening in the first 7 months of this year? Entitlement spending's already up 11% in the first 7 months of this year. That's stunning amounts of money. But receipts, we put revenues on here because most people know it, but for Ways and Means, tax revenues are the receipts. We're down 10%. Do you understand what I'm saying? Spending on entitlements is up 11%, but revenues are down 10%. Do you understand what the hell's going on? There is a reason. You remember a few days ago or 2 weeks ago, all of a sudden the Treasury Secretary goes, oh God, the cutoff date when they've used up all the extraordinary measures is moving up, what was it, a month, 6 weeks? That was because the tax revenues weren't coming in nearly as high as we expected. And you start to understand some of what's going on. Just this year, we will spend 40% more on interest. We're going to spend over $100 billion so far. I think the first 7 months, over $100 billion more just on interest, because we were living in this artificial fantasy land for the last decade with suppressed interest rates. And now, remember, it's not just the $2 trillion we're going to borrow this year. And yes, it's approaching $2 trillion. It's the fact that we have what's called a weighted daily average. I think we're about, 60, 70 months. And that basically means within that time, you have to refinance half of all U.S. sovereign debt. That new sovereign debt, when it's refinanced, or the new $2 trillion that has to be financed, is at today's interest rates, not at the artificially low interest rates we had 2 years ago, before the Biden inflation took off. Actually, that's not fair. Democrat inflation took off. But we're going to spend dramatically more on interest. And be aware, if those people who are giddy in today's inflation number didn't pay enough attention to what the core calculation was. That core calculation was sitting about 4.9, but if you read the notes, it was so sticky, we may have higher interest rates in this country for years. Not this magic thing where, hey, we're going to fall back down to 2% inflation at the end of the year and everything's going to be hunky-dory again. That's not what the data is saying. And you got to understand, federal spending soars, revenues fall. And this is from the Wall Street Journal just this last week. Budget surpluses including adjustments for timing effects. The outlays already, this was just this last month. April's supposed to be our big month where we take in all these tax revenues. We were functionally $274 billion upside down. That's a 74% change from last year. Do you understand what's going on? And I'm sorry, I'm going through these pretty fast because I have a cutoff date time in 10 minutes. Federal spending, and this is also from the Wall Street Journal. April, we fell by $135 billion from what we expected. Year-to-date spending is up $400 billion, 12%. Now, do this with me. Federal spending is up 12% from last year. Year-to-date deficits. Now, this one you're going to love. Year-to-date deficit, we're doing a calculation. It's not done yet, and we don't know. We're 7 months in, so we're doing some guessing. Maybe there'll be some late tax receipts. Maybe all of a sudden, bunches of people will start working and start paying additional taxes. But we may hit $2 trillion this year. And right now, year-to-date deficits, we're functionally, this is for last month, $928 billion, are up 236% from this time last year. If you want to know why many of us are so emphatic on actually getting some fiscal constraints, this is the punchline here. Please hear this. Why do we need some fiscal constraints as part of this debt ceiling? If we do not communicate to the world debt markets that we're going to start to take our debt seriously, we will be punished as a nation. Now, that punishment may mean our bonds are just at a little bit higher interest rate. But you already saw one of the previous boards, just this year, interest is costing us 40% more. Just a couple ticks on interest rates when you're floating our publicly held debt. I'm actually not even sure where we're at. Are we at maybe $24, $25 trillion of publicly held debt? This stuff here should scare you to death if you own a calculator. And yeah, we really are heading towards borrowing $2 trillion this year. We weren't supposed to be anywhere near this. This is where we're heading at. And this is just assuming that the numbers are going to come in as they have. The problem is, if you've been following what CBO has been publishing, they keep ticking down the gross domestic product calculation, the GDP calculation for the rest of the year. We're down. I think the calculation for 2024 is we expect a year of 1.2. They're basically telegraphing if we hit recession second half of this year, I guarantee you we're going to blow through $2 trillion of borrowing just this year. And this, I know this chart is almost impossible to read. You know, we printed it too small, but individual income taxes, here's our big hit. Individual income taxes look like they've fallen about 18%. Corporate income taxes are up about 9%. Payroll taxes payroll taxes are up about 9%. Corporate income taxes are up about 4%. But the total receipts are down 10%. But here's our spending charts. Social Security has gone up. The spend on Social Security is up about 11% so far this year. Medicare, remember the vast majority of the borrowing in this country, the vast majority of it, is just Medicare. It's healthcare costs. Medicare this year, the spend in it is already up 15% in a single year. Medicaid is up maybe 7-8% in the spend just this year. Anyone see the math problem? And some of the calculations, so this is from CRFB, the Committee for Responsible Budget, our federal budget. They're actually almost predicting we are going to cross over 7.5% of the entire economy being in borrowed money. So we're being told long-run GDP, this is CBO's calculation, long-run GDP is basically going to be sitting at about 1.8, and yet borrowing is going to be 7.5% of the economy. But the growth in the economy will be 1.8. Does anyone see the math problem? This Federal Reserve now has lowered the outlook down to 1.2 for just this year. And even the Economist magazine here, in their math, has us now starting this year and starting now to run deficits that are 7% or more. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, this math should scare us all half to death. There is a reason if we do not get some fiscal constraints, whether it be part of this debt ceiling or something else, the markets will punish us. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. Does the gentleman have a motion?
Mr. Speaker, I move we do stand adjourned.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye.